Thank you so much for joining this week's podcast. This week I have Paul Salsbury. He helps you build your trust. And this conversation is all about trust. If you want to know what a trust is and why they're important, I highly, highly recommend you watch this episode because, in my opinion, after hearing this conversation and being a part of it, I recommend anyone that does own a home that has assets to definitely get their trust set up. If you have questions, definitely watch this podcast. It'll be really, really good for you and your family. If you have any questions, reach out to me. Please, if you can, like and subscribe to this channel. That really, really helps me out and also everyone else that's participating. Thank you so much and enjoy the episode. We have Paul Salsbury here. We're going to have a conversation about trusts.
Yeah.
And what a trust is, how to set them up, what the benefits are. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of introduce you to the audience and share who you are. So we have Paul Salsbury. You're an estate planning coordinator, consultant, and raised first half of your life, a place called Palmer, Alaska, traveled to 5 different continents. What continents?
Africa, Australia, Europe, North America, South America.
Wow.
So
nice.
I just got Asia and Antarctica.
Wow.
Surprisingly, Antarctica is...
Antarctica. You've been to Antarctica?
I want to go. That's the next place I want to go.
Okay.
So.
Proud father of 2 amazing kids, enjoys the outdoors, meeting people from all around the world, helping people understand complex issues with patience and ease. Career highlights: you got your bachelor's degree in communication and public affairs, and recently a master's in psychology counseling. Nice. That's cool. Where'd you get your degree?
Simpson.
Oh, very cool. Current projects: learning more about gun trusts. That's interesting. And setting up foundations for clients who want to leave their legacy beyond a trust.
Yep.
I like it. Okay, cool. Yeah, I want to talk more about the gun trusts here in a little bit. Personal passions and interests: travel, hiking, kayaking, food, and culture. I love traveling as well. It's super fun. Topics of interest: how having a revocable living trust protects your home. So we're going to talk about that. What the difference is between a revocable and non-revocable. I think that's a big question, and how it can protect your home. We're going to get into that. Yeah, so I brought Paul in because he's been helping me with my trust, and you've been going through what it takes and getting me all set up. So that's super awesome. I thought I'd have you come on and talk about trusts and why they're important.
Yeah, absolutely.
What got you interested in trusts?
Well, about 5-6 years ago, I was working with some other people here in town. They were running a investment, managing retirement accounts, stuff like that.
Okay.
And this was just kind of a tool that we were offering clients. And at some point, they said, you want to ever go out on your own, you can. And so right around COVID,
Okay.
I decided I'm going to do this on my own, not knowing COVID was going to happen.
Yeah.
And the world kind of came to a standstill, and slowly by word of mouth, I just won one person after another.
Yeah.
And 5 years later, I have an office, multiple clientele, high net worth clients.
Wow.
Doing expos and doing the Chico Home Garden Show Expo this weekend.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Very
so if
cool.
you're down in the Chico area, come see me at Chico and go from there.
Yeah, I know that trusts, a lot of people don't have them. A lot of people don't have them and don't know the importance of having a trust.
Yeah.
And so I've had personal experience with having clients that are getting financing, or maybe they purchased a home and they didn't have a trust set up. I've had it to where, the home had to go into probate. We'll talk about that.
Right.
And also I've had it on the other side where customers have actually tried to buy homes where there was no trust involved, and they had to buy a home that was in probate. So maybe I thought we would just start by explaining what a trust is and why it's important to have one.
Yeah. So basically, the basics of a trust is it's essentially a legal entity or a legal written document that is recognized in the court system that a judge has to honor and uphold the way it's written, because it's a legal binding contract. Whereas with a will, it is essentially a wish. It is, I would like this to happen, but there is no guarantee. Whereas with a trust, it is written firm foundation. That's just how it is. And you can set up however you need to, however you want to, in a way with a legal written language to protect the people's assets and make your decisions permanent,
And this is set up for individuals that want to, if they own a house, if they have assets, if they have bank accounts, large amounts of money, they definitely should have a trust.
Really, I mean, yeah, obviously, people who have house, car, boat, if you have children or any kind of asset that's got a title to it, essentially, you're going to want to have a trust. But more importantly, especially in California, you're going to want to have a trust just in general because it encompasses so many more benefits than what a will does. And so a lot of people have this misconception that, oh, well, I don't own much. I just own, I have a mortgage on my house and I have a car, a few $1,000s or a few $100s in my bank account, and I'm raising kids. I don't really need a trust. Well, I'd like to get more into that about the benefits of having a trust over a will.
Yeah, so a will, and I'm very ignorant on this. So a will basically is a document that anyone can write, and basically you stick it in a drawer somewhere or in a safe and say, "This is my will. Mm-hmm. This is what I would like to happen if I was to pass."
Right. Yeah. Essentially, people have just written wills over the years, either they've handwritten something up and maybe had a few people sign their name to witness it or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's really just to let it's for your loved ones for when you pass away to know what your wishes are, what you would like to have happen. Yeah. Whereas with a trust, by getting a trust set up, especially if you have children, you can even express your wishes, but in the moment when you pass away, family members are, emotions run high and people don't always make the right decisions. Yeah. And unfortunately, as much as people want families get along after a person passes away, family does not always get along. And so that's where having a trust comes in. It is very beneficial because then you'd get to decide as the initial trustee who gets what, or if somebody even gets anything. Whereas with a will, it's, people can come to court and contest it.
And what kind of trusts are there? So in your bio, there was I think you called it a non-revocable trust.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between a non-revocable and a revocable trust?
Yeah. So revocable is basically essentially what it says in its name. It's the ability to be revoked, to be canceled out, to change. Yeah, change or canceled out. So I've had clients where they had a single grantor trust or they had a dual grantor trust and then their spouse passed away. And then they actually just wanted a whole new trust with just their name on it. And so we ended up revoking the dual grantor trust and creating a single grantor trust. But more specifically with revocable, irrevocable, essentially, revocable, you can make changes or you can cancel it out. Irrevocable, the moment you place an asset into the irrevocable trust, such as a house or a bank account, you no longer own it.
And it can no longer be changed.
And it no longer can be changed. It's like concrete, can't be taken out or anything like that.
Can it be sold?
No, you can't sell anything. Yep.
Really?
So you put a bank account into an irrevocable trust, no matter how hard you try, it's not coming out. So it is there. It is no longer your money. It is now waiting until you pass away, and then it goes to whoever you listed as a beneficiary.
Got it. And so I imagine there's circumstances where, so most of the time, most people will want to get a revocable trust.
Correct. Yeah.
Not a non-revocable trust.
Yeah. There is one other exception where an irrevocable trust could be beneficial is if you are an ultra high net worth individual and you want to place a certain amount of money aside and have it not touched for legality reasons whatsoever. You can put money aside in an irrevocable trust.
And and no one can get to it.
No, including from what I've researched online, specifically people who are on Medicaid or maybe Medicare, when they want to recover assets after a person has passed away to pay off what they've paid for healthcare purposes. The only way you can avoid someone like Medicare coming in and taking ownership of a home or assets is to place those assets in an irrevocable trust.
Got it. So if I heard you correctly, I'm just kind of repeat what you just said so I understand it. So what you just said is certain circumstances when someone should do a non-revocable trust is when potentially you have a family member that's older and you're helping provide care for this person, and this person will set up a non-revocable trust to get reimbursed for what they've had to spend. And that way, if the government or Medicare wants to get any kind of money out of those proceeds, they're not able to, that money can then go back to the person that it was meant to go back to in the trust.
If they're listed as a beneficiary, essentially, yeah.
What happens if you don't have a trust? Let's say someone passes away. Let's say I'm an owner of a house and the house is in my name and I pass away. What happens if it's not in a trust?
So essentially what happens is the house would have to go through what's known as probate process. That length of time varies. It can be anywhere from, on average, 6 months up to a year and a half, sometimes 2 years. It really depends on the state and the county in which the probate has to go through. I know a really good example is a year or two ago, I was looking at purchasing a home. And I contacted the realtor, said, hey, I'm really interested in this home. And they reached back out and they said, hey, actually that home has to go through a probate. And about a year later, I got notified that that home was finally out of probate and able to be sold. Took a full year.
So what I'm hearing you say is that probate is essentially the government deciding where the asset goes.
They have to make sure. So when you don't set up a trust, you don't set up a legal representative to act on your behalf. Really, what a trust is doing is you're setting up. So first, there's two things. One, you're in charge of your trust. The trust that I set up with people, they're the initial trustee. Then they assign what's known as a successor trustee.
Successor trustee.
That trustee, that successor trustee becomes also known as the executor and kind of manages everything, pays off any outstanding debts, closes out accounts, distributes assets or, acquires assets or whatever. When you don't set up a trust and you only set up a will, or even if you don't set up even a will, then the government or probate process, they step in because they're acting now on your behalf.
So they're essentially the trustee. The successor trustee is basically the government or the court.
Right.
The court system.
A person that you've honestly probably never, ever met. And you've never been able to really sit down and say, this is what I want. They then have the task to make the decision of what they think is your best interest. At that point, 1, 2, or more people can come to court and petition the court and say, hey, Pete passed away and he told me that he was going to give me his 64 Mustang or whatever, and here's a note that he wrote me saying that he was going to give it to me. And then somebody else comes along and says, no, he said he was going to give it to me. And
I had this conversation a while ago. We talked and wow.
And so at that point, then a judge has to hear both sides of the story. They have to set a court date, set a hearing, and then they have to hear it out, and then they have to make that decision. So you work your entire life to earn all these assets that you wanted to maybe give to your children or to family members or whatever. And in a blink of an eye, it can essentially go to somebody that you never intended to have it go to. Whereas getting a trust set up, you get to decide. So I tell people, you don't get to decide when you pass away or how necessarily, but you do get to decide what you do with what you have.
It makes total sense. And I had a trust a while ago, but it's been so long. I was married and then, went through a divorce and kind of, that trust was done. I don't think we did anything with it. I think it was just still there, but all the assets that were in there are now sold or, gone. So we're setting up a new trust.
Correct. Yeah.
So that's an interesting question. So you should basically revisit the trust often.
Yeah. So on average, a person should review the trust probably every 3 to 5 years, depending on the complexities of what you have going on. I have a client, he asked me to come visit with him once a year. He's one of my high ultra net worth clients, and he's actually paying me additional just to meet with him once a year for a couple hours, just to make sure everything's good to go. And I just met with him just a few weeks ago.
Wow.
And so
it's definitely good to revisit because things change.
Yep.
relationships change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of go through, I made some additional questions here just to ask. I thought that might be interesting. So what do you think are some of the common misconceptions people have about trust on why they actually don't set one up?
I think the first and the most common misconception is they think that trusts are only for millionaires, billionaires, people who have a lot of assets to give. Like you mentioned before, people who, buy a house and they have a mortgage. I've had a few clients tell me, oh yeah, well, we have a house, but we don't own it. We're just making payments on it. So we can't put that into the house or into the trust, right? That's when I let them know, like, actually, no, you can.
Interesting. So some people think that because they have a mortgage, they don't technically own it, and so they're not able to control it. If they pass, they think maybe it goes back to the bank.
Right. Yeah. And
that's
so
not the case,
that's not necessarily
Yeah,
the case,
that's not the case.
Depending on, how the terms are. So if you're a first-time home buyer, if you set up a trust as you're going through the process, it's very well possible that you can get your house put right into a trust immediately upon closing.
Absolutely.
But then furthermore, or just shortly thereafter, you can get everything set up in a way where it's streamlined, So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and to answer your question, yes, a first-time homebuyer absolutely can get that trust set up. They can put it right into the trust immediately when they close. We give them the option too, where we can close it in a trust. It's totally fine. It has to be a revocable trust. It can't be a non-revocable trust for the reasons that you said earlier in the conversation. Yeah, they can set it up and then we can record right in the trust, or they can get it set up after, and then they can have would be able to get it switched from their name into the trust. Is that correct?
Yep, absolutely. I work with an organization that deeds houses into the trust all the time. And I've worked with clients here in Shasta County, but then also I have clients in other states and other counties, because the great thing about the organization I work with is we have a network of attorneys that work in all 50 U.S. states. So some of the benefits is really just being able to set up a trust wherever you're at. So I have a client who has a home here, but then they have another condo in Hawaii. We were able to get that condo drafted up to put into their California trust here. I was just recorded in Hawaii at the local recorder's office. But then furthermore, let's say you buy a home here in California and then you're like, you know what, California's not for me. I'm out of here. I'm going to Texas, or I'm going to Colorado or Montana. You contact us and say, hey, I'm moving. We'll restate that trust for you at no additional cost other than just the cost of the notary. And then next thing you know, your new address and your new home is put into the trust where you're at, versus having to find an attorney or pay more legal fees.
Yeah. I imagine that another misconception would be that people don't have trust or don't get trust because they think the cost is astronomical, or they think they have to hire an attorney to do this. And really, what it's sounding like, you find an expert in trust like yourself that does this day in and day out, and you can definitely help them complete their trust.
Yeah, absolutely. So even though I'm not an attorney, I work with attorneys. And so I am, as they put it, I am an independent subject matter expert.
Yeah.
So I've been doing this for about 5 years. And so I know the ins and outs of how it all goes and everything. So I find and acquire the clients, I gather the information, I submit the documentation to the network, and then in return, I get the documents back that are legally drafted up in the written legal language for the state in which the client lives in. And then oftentimes I'll oversee the signing and the notarization of the documents. But then furthermore, I'll take those documents, get them scanned and uploaded onto our online platform. We have this very secure, state-of-the-art online platform where clients' trust can be uploaded so that if it ever gets lost or damaged in a fire or flood or anything like that, essentially you can reprint out your trust documents without having to pay.
This is my next question. So let's say there wasn't that portal, and let's say you lost your trust documents. What happens then? Is it recorded somewhere?
Unless the attorney that a person goes to has a copy of it, you pretty much have to pay to get it all done.
You don't have a trust.
Yeah, you have to get it done all over again.
Interesting. So if you do have a trust, you want to really make sure you know where that trust is at all times, and also have your family members know, or the person that helped you get the trust knows where that trust is located and stored.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have the ability where you can email documents to family members that maybe live in other states or cities so that they have a copy and know exactly what's to be done and what happens next.
Got it. Is there
Yeah.
any state where trust is better in one state, or is it all pretty much the same federally with trust? Like a California trust, is it different than a Nevada trust or an Oregon trust, where it's located?
Yeah, I just had this question asked to me earlier. As far as I know, there is no benefit of having a trust in, say, Delaware versus California. A trust is essentially, it goes with you. It's a legal binding document. It just, however you want to set it up, but the benefits of California trust is that you're going to avoid that probate tax. So I was just looking up before our session here. So in California, our probate tax is structured. So the first $100,000, you're taxed at 4%. Then,
Oh, wow. I did not know this. So
Yeah.
let's say you don't have a trust
yeah,
and something happens, you pass away, the state becomes the trustee, they decide who gets what, and they get a fee for that.
correct. Yeah. So in addition to having
Wow.
to wait this entire time just to sell mom's house or dad's house or whatever, not only are you having to deal with that, but you're now having to pay off a tax to the state of California.
A tax,
Yeah. And so California is not just a flat
And
rate tax, it's structured.
It's a fee. So you could have 10 properties and it's 4% of, let's say, $4 million. That's a lot of money.
Right. And here's the other thing. It's not on what's owed on the property. It's what the property is valued at.
So you could literally have not much equity and you have properties, assets, cars, whatever. It's the value of the asset that they take the fee on, not necessarily the net equity.
Right. So
Wow.
really good example, Bay Area client
Yep.
has $1 million home, first $100,000, 4%. So it's $4,000.
Wow.
Second $100,000, 3%, $3,000.
No way.
Gets a little bit easier, but still not as good. Next 100,000 or next 900,000, I think it's 2%. The last 1% is on the next 9 million. So I did the math
Oh my
before our session here. $1 million house, you're going to pay $18,000 just in taxes that are going to have to go to the state of California
For not setting up and having
for not
a
setting
trust.
up a trust.
That's huge, because if I have any, I mean, I'm gonna be telling every customer that buys a house, hey, do you have a trust set up? Especially the ones, I did not know this, because I can tell them, say, hey, did you know probate costs this much money?
Right.
To manage.
And so oftentimes
estate.
the kids, when mom or dad dies, instead of being able to keep the house and acquire it, they have to sell the house off to pay
to
the
cover
probate,
the probate.
cover the taxes.
Oh, wow. So even if they wanted to keep it, maybe they don't have the money and there's not, it's equity, let's say.
Right.
They would have to either get a loan or get some money to actually pay that tax.
Yeah.
How many people do you think are in this category where they have multiple assets that don't have a trust set up?
I'd say, in my opinion, over 70%.
70% of the population that
Yeah.
are homeowners have assets, don't have a trust.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I do these expos at the Home Garden Show. I did the Reading Home Garden Show Expo. I'm going to do the next one next March and stuff. And all those people are homeowners coming in. And that's one of the first things that they mention is like, yeah, we're a homeowner, but we don't have a trust set up. So I'll get their information and follow up with them. So
Another question I had, let's say a business owner. Should a business owner can you put a business in a trust?
you can. So just recently did that for a client of mine. And so it takes a little bit more finesse, but there's some great benefits to putting the business into the trust. So obviously, just like a business, you go from a sole proprietorship to an LLC. One of the main reasons people do that is for liability purposes, to shift the liability off of them as an individual
To
and
the
more
company.
onto the trust. When you take a business and you put it into the trust, you create even more protection for not only you, but then just for the business in general. Because then when people go, if there's any kind of litigation of any kind, they can't really go after the business because the trust now owns the business. The trust owns the business and the trust runs the business. You are still the
Really?
managing trustee, of the business. You still write the checks, you still manage the day to day, but when it all comes down to it, the trust is the owner of everything.
For a business, let's say someone owns a business, it's an LLC, and something happens, it's a good business. Let's say they own heavy equipment operating business and do really well. Something happens to them. You have this really good business, and all of a sudden the owner's gone. The state actually decides how to split up that business.
Yeah, essentially the business has to get dissolved, go through
And
the
it's a
probate process.
So the business would go through probate. So it wouldn't be like a son is in the business, he's working in the business, he helps dad out, and dad passes away. Now the son says, oh yeah, I'm going to take over, but it has to go through probate in order for that LLC or whoever, if he was the owner, it has to go through probate to actually get to the son.
Right, yeah. And all of the business assets that are incorporated within the business, all that has to be kind of processed just as if it was your own personal assets, your cars, your trucks, your boats, your RVs, all that kind of stuff has to go through the probate process. But putting a business into the trust, it doesn't really skip probate in a sense. It really just does it in advance. You know, there's even when I've talked to the clerk for the probate for Shasta County here, she's mentioned that people have come in and said, hey, we want to do probate in advance. What can we do? And
in advance, what do you mean by that?
Well, essentially, they want to get everything set up so that everything's done and over with for the probate. Yeah.
Before they pass.
Correct.
And why not just set up a trust?
Well, that's essentially what the clerk told him. He said, well, yeah, you need to set up a trust. The county has to be neutral in that point. So they can't refer any one particular person. Yeah. So they just say, well, just go find an attorney, go find somebody. Yeah. And there's a lot of great attorneys here in town. Yeah. A lot of them, some do specific estate planning, but most of them do something else. They do family law or they do defense attorney or something like that. They'll do estate planning, but that's not really what they do day in and day out. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times you'll go in, you'll maybe make a deposit or you'll pay for something. And then 3 or 6 weeks later, they'll maybe get around to it. Whereas with me, that's all I do all day long. So my turnaround time is pretty quick.
I hear what you're saying. So what I heard you say is county's going to say, hey, go talk to an attorney, and then they're going to try to reach out to some attorneys. And I've tried that. And good luck getting a call back or, days, weeks before you're able to actually meet with somebody. And what you're saying is this is what you do day in and day out, and you actually can help right away, get that done right away for that family.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool. Quick question that came up. Let's say I'm a sole proprietor and I own a business. Can I put the sole proprietor business in a trust?
So you wouldn't necessarily put a sole proprietorship business into a trust because everything that the business is just in your name.
Bank account maybe could be in that trust, but
that's about it. So essentially, it's just for LLCs and above, and you can put more than one LLC or S corp into a trust.
Which would be another benefit of actually having a corporation or an LLC for your business is that you can have it in a trust, whereas a sole proprietor, it's not as safe.
Right. Yeah. Because sole proprietorship, you're at risk. Think of it this way. A trust is really doing two main things. One, it's avoiding or doing probate in advance and avoiding that taxation. Yep. But then secondly, it's keeping everything private. Once you put something into a trust, essentially you technically don't own it on paper. The trust owns it. You may manage it, but when it comes down to it, your house, your car, it's in the John Smith trust, or the Smith or the Frank, whatever trust. And I've had people set up trust names that are their last name. I've had them set it up as just the initials. Makes it that much more ambiguous.
I think I understand what you're saying. So let's say I'm a high net worth person and I have a lot of assets. Well, if I don't have a trust, let's say I have 4 or 5 homes, they can go and see, oh, this person has 6 homes and they're all free and clear because that's public record.
Right.
And so they're like, yeah, we need to sue them because they ran into us, at a stoplight or something.
Right. And so if you put your home into a trust, and someone's going after you for litigation purposes, maybe they find an attorney and the attorney finds out that, oh, this person doesn't own anything, and maybe you get everything into a trust, or maybe they somehow find out that you do have a trust and you have things in a trust. Most attorneys are not going to want to take on a case that have assets into a trust,
So
because
it's a lot more difficult to go over assets if they're in a trust.
Yeah.
Why is that?
It's just the legality purposes. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of it. I just know that oftentimes when an attorney finds out that something's in a trust, you're paying for the time
It's an
for the
uphill battle.
Yeah, it's an uphill battle. So a lot of people are gonna it's not
Shy
worth
away.
it. Yeah.
If a homeowner still has a mortgage, how does that impact the process of putting their home in a trust?
Yeah. So we mentioned that a little bit earlier, but just to reiterate on that. So the main thing is just, you contact, you get a trust set up, and we get a copy of your deed. And then I work with the deed preparer contact that I have. We get it redrafted up so that you're selling your home to yourself, really. You're just transferring ownership.
Yeah.
So you still get to live in the home. You still get to utilize the home. You can sell the home in a trust. I'm sure you've had a handful of clients where the client was selling a home, but the home was in a trust. And there's just a little extra step to get it out of the trust, maybe a few extra signatures to get it out of the trust to be able to sell it, stuff like that. Sometimes mortgage lenders will ask a client, in order to refinance, they'll have to take it out of a trust, but you just want to make sure that you can put it back in.
Yeah, typically we could refinance. If it's in a trust, we'll just keep it right in the trust.
Yeah, and that's really smart.
Yeah.
If you can keep a house into a trust in the midst of refinancing, it's the smartest thing possible. And from what I've heard, it is doable. It's just a matter of the terms of
and the
a
only
lender.
thing that we ask for in that process, if it's a home is currently in a trust, they want to refinance, then we'll just say, hey, we just need a copy of the trust, and because we want to make sure that it's a revocable trust so that it can change, because they don't want to put the home in a non-revocable trust, because then it's going to be very difficult to maybe foreclose on that house.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been reading up a little bit more about just some aspects of mortgage companies kind of wanting to be aware if a home is going into a trust. Some, depending on the mortgage lender, they can impose what's called a due-on clause. And so that's really just them demanding payment up front. And so as long as, you get permission in advance and the lender's aware of it and it's a revocable trust, I think you're good to go.
Yeah, Fannie Mae and Freddie, they both say it's fine. You can put your home in a trust. There won't be any due-on clause. That's going to be most mortgages out there. They just want a copy of the trust. The due-on sale clause would come if it went into a non-revocable trust.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I believe there's another one that I read up on, if I'm saying this term correctly, a step-up basis. And this is where if a home was purchased before 1972, there's some tax advantages. And so there's just a little bit more special care that's needed for putting that particular home into a trust. But those are just questions that I just ask clients, like how long have you had the home? And if they've had it, for a long period of time and it meets that criteria, then we want to make sure that they are able to retain those benefits.
Oh, the benefits, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, any tax benefits with having a trust, assets in a trust?
I'm not a tax person, unfortunately, but I'm sure there are advantages. I've been reading a little bit more up on just some advantages of putting assets into a trust and then managing the trust and putting a business into the trust and the write-offs available and how you can write off more things and more aspects of maybe a business or an individual. The main advantage is not paying the tax to the state of California or any state for that matter. It's just, and it keeps the family, the home in the family generations for a period of time. I really want to work towards not just getting people set up with a trust, but really setting it up to where if they want to have this home, maybe they have a family cabin, a property or something where they want to,
sure
it continues on and it transfers from their kids to their grandkids to their great grandkids and go on and so forth.
So that's interesting. So if I have some assets that I want to continue to be in the family. In the trust, I could make instructions that said, this home will never be sold outside of the trust. In other words, I could say, I want this home to continuously be for my kids and their kids' kids and their kids' kids.
Right. I mean, there's
Really?
there's aspects of that. One typical way you do that is you set up a business like an LLC, and then the business or the
Is
LLC
in the trust.
is in the trust, and then the home is in the trust, and then it's no longer you. When you pass
Owner.
away, the successor trustee becomes the manager of the asset of the business, so that it continues on, because trusts are an infinite entity. So typically when you're funding the trust aspect, you want to put the trust either as a primary or contingent beneficiary, because people pass away, but trusts live on for
I see. So
an infinite period of
The
time
trust be a beneficiary of
the estate.
the estate. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's just I'm learning the ways that you can put up a business and a trust together to where I have this one client, he has like 5 acres, and he wants to set up a business, and he wants to get a trust set up, put the business into the trust, so that essentially when he passes away, the house is never sold. It's continued on, and it creates this kind of foundation where people can come up to the property, do retreats and things like that. And so I really want to get more into down the road about how to set up that legacy aspect of things.
Yeah.
When you pass away, you're setting up these foundations, or this legacy aspect where things continue on, and it helps people for an unknown period of time.
Yeah, and that's a very different mindset than I think most have regarding their finances, regarding their assets. They're just thinking, I'm just thinking 5-10 years down the road, but you're talking about 100, 200 years down the road, having these assets continually be in the family line and affecting the legacy of my family.
Yeah. Well, you think about like the McConnell Foundation,
Wow.
and these other organizations, and you look at some of these ultra high net worth people like Bradley or Grant Cardone, you Google them and then Google the word trust on top of that, you'll find videos on TikTok, and they talk about how they don't own anything. And they have everything into a trust, and it just continues, onto everything. Yeah. So
if someone wanted to, let's say a homeowner, they wanted to get a trust, what can they expect for a cost, to typical cost to get a trust going?
Yeah. So right now, basically, I'm charging about $2,500, and that encompasses a full package deal. Essentially, you get your revocable trust, your living and last will. You also get a financial power of attorney. You get a healthcare power of attorney, an organ donation, and advanced healthcare directives.
I did want to talk about that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so about $2,500, and they can have everything set up.
Yeah. It can be a little bit higher, if your client, if you have more houses, you have businesses, it's going to require a little bit more time. But a standard married couple or single individual is going to be about $2,500. The benefit of that is that even though that seems like it might be a little bit high for some people, if they just are renting or they only own a home and they don't have much, is we can make those unlimited updates and changes. So if they are freshly married and they want to have children, then every time that they have a child, they can update their trust, and there's no additional legal cost aspects. But then also if they want to move out of state.
That's really not very much. And I imagine that cost goes up with time.
Yeah, there's been some
because
inflation
of
and stuff.
Inflation and, the cost to actually do the workings to get all the assets into the trust. There's expenses there. And so the sooner they do it, the better. It's just going to get more expensive.
Yeah. And I wanted to circle back and just talk on one more thing.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned about writing something up specifically. One of the things that has been pointed out to me in the organization that I work with is that oftentimes, a lot of people come in and they give the generals of the trust of what they want to do, and the attorney says, oh, it's very complex, and it's going to be $4,000 or $5,000 or whatever. This is a pretty standard trust. But the great thing is you can set up the standard trust, and then for an additional small few $100s, we can do what's basically called an amendment to the trust. So instead of paying maybe $1,000 extra for having an attorney to write up something very specific, because again, you're paying for their time. You can do an amendment for, $300-$400 with us, and we're getting it written up legally specific on that one thing that you want. And you're essentially saving time and money in the long run just by, carving out that one area that you're wanting very specific. Maybe I want this person to have this, and one client talk about how they wanted, after they passed away, they wanted a certain person to live in the home until that person passed away. And then the house could be sold. So things like that.
If they have special requests, they can have that and constantly update that if they needed to.
Yeah,
if they wanted
absolutely.
To. You talked about healthcare directive. Tell me more about that and why that's important.
So healthcare directive, I mean, it's one of those things like I maybe mentioned at the beginning or before we got started, so there's this idea of, based on maybe my DNA of when I think I should live to. Like I think for the most part, I should probably live to like 80, 85 years old. Sure. Whether I live that long is a completely different story. So it's the difference between should versus will. And so we don't get to really decide, I want to tell this really quick story, and
sure.
it's a local one.
Yeah.
So a woman in Anderson, she's riding her bike with her 2 kids down at Anderson River Park. It's a nice afternoon, and out of the middle of nowhere, this branch from this tree falls and lands on top of her. And
On the mom.
On top of the mom.
Okay.
And a moment's notice, she's knocked unconscious. Every rib in her bone is broken. Ugh. She's rushed to the hospital. She has emergency surgery. She survived, but it was in that moment's notice where she was just completely like, that's it, And so, I happen to know the individual. And so it's one of those things where she wasn't doing anything dangerous with her life. She was just living. But more importantly, I mean, you go back years ago, for those of us that are a bit older, you can look up the Terry Schiavo case down in Florida. That was a matter of, that went on for a long period of time. It was a matter of I believe it was a husband and her family were arguing over whether or not she should live or not, stay on life support or essentially remove her from life support. And it became nationwide news. Oh, wow. And it became a litigated aspect where a judge had to make a decision
whether she stayed on life support or not.
Yeah. And it was all because she didn't have anything set up, And so you can have your spouse be the one that wants to make the decision, but if there's nothing set up legally, somebody else can come along and say, well, and I don't know the legal aspects of how the hospitals are going to handle that and stuff. But oftentimes, if you start getting more than one person in there wanting to make decisions that are different than what, one person's making, it gets really, really difficult really quick. And so with us, we go through a very comprehensive series of questions where we ask, do you want to be on life support, or do you want to even be transported, or do you want to have pain management? If you're pregnant and something happens to you, do you want the doctors to provide life-sustaining treatment to the point of birth of the child, And then there's organ donation and aspects of that as well.
So basically the healthcare directive explains to the court or to the hospital saying, hey, if something was to happen and I can't make a decision, then I'm putting this person in charge to make the decision, or I'm making the decision right now before I actually get to that spot.
Right, because if you're induced into a coma, you can't talk to the doctor and say, this is what I want to have happen. Yeah. So at that point, they're at the mercy of another individual coming along and making the decision for them.
So it's kind of like probate, but it's the hospital saying they're making the decision.
Yeah.
And it may or may not be the right decision.
Yeah. Or even there's even an aspect of conservatorship. If a person doesn't have family members nearby, then if a person becomes conserved or gets conserved, and then health decisions have to be made, it can be very difficult, because at that point, if family is involved or not involved, it's a matter of who has legal authority over this.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
And if a person's conserved, then at that point...
So how does the hospital know, or the doctor know, how do they know if there is a health directive?
You would want to notify the hospital. You'd want to have it placed on file with their records department.
Got it.
And then,
And that's part of the process.
Yeah. So I just encourage and let them know,
Yeah.
and then go from there, and then let your loved ones know, because things happen, things change
Yeah.
at a moment's notice, where, as we get older, we realize, maybe you wanted life-sustaining treatment, and then 10, 20 years later, you're realizing, you know what, I think I want to change things. And so make those decisions. But again, if you don't have it written down on a legal binding document that's signed and notarized with two
And
witnesses.
so when you get a trust, you get that too. You get to help you. Not only do you get the assets, but you also are determining, the aspect of, God forbid something happened, you're able to have that decision made in a time where you can't make that decision.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It really is.
That's awesome. I learned a lot from this conversation, and if anything, it's putting more. I should have gotten a trust a lot or updated my trust a lot sooner than what I have. I'm glad I'm getting it done now. Also, it's putting more conviction that I need to also ask my clients more about having a trust.
Yeah. And I'd love, if there's anybody out there that is similar into your profession or a similar profession, I'd love to work with them and their clients as well to really help them out. I mean, it is me as an individual at the moment, but I'd like to grow, and expand myself in a way where, I become the guy in the area known.
Yeah.
I love to help people out as much as possible. I like to create win-win situations as much as possible.
I love that.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. So how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah. So they can email me, Paul at strategicconsultingpro.com, or they can call me or text me. Absolutely. And I have a website as well, strategicconsultingpro.com.
Awesome.
They can reach out to me that way as well. But I'd love to sit down with you and offer a free consultation and see how I can help you.
Yeah, so if anyone listening, if they're curious, they want some help, they need some directive, you'll sit down with them for free, go over their situation, and then you could help them with the trust if they decide.
Yeah. And if they're not here in California, again, if they're out of town or out of state and you're hearing this message or someone sent this to you, I'd be happy to help you, whatever state or town you're in.
Well, thanks a lot, Paul. This was amazing. I think that every homeowner should watch this episode about trusts, and it's very, very enlightening. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Thanks.
Yeah.